Camera settings. Now, a common thing I see with videographers who are just starting out is they worry way too much about this. In this video, we're going to talk about my favorite picture profiles for Sony and Canon cameras, along with my favorite camera settings. So first, for me, there are only 5 settings you need to worry about. As you get more advanced, you can learn more ways to achieve the look you want by adjusting certain settings more. All you need to worry about are the main 5, which for me are frame rate, shutter speed, aperture, ISO, and white balance. First, frame rate. Your camera has the ability to shoot a variety of frames per second, or FPS, which does exactly how it sounds. It determines how many frames per second you are shooting. The standard frame rate that our eyes are used to seeing in Hollywood films is 24 frames per second. So that is the frame rate that we recommend using if you want your videos to look more like cinematic films. However, I shoot everything at 60 frames per second, which means it shoots 60 individual frames per second, which allows me to slow it down to 24 frames per second in post to give me a beautiful and dreamy slow motion look. Because I'm going for that dreamy, romantic, magical look, this is the frame rate that I use and recommend for using for wedding videography. However, there are definitely times when I do use 24 frames per second. I always switch to 24 frames per second when I am filming vows or dance parties, because there's no reason to record people speaking in slow motion. And dance parties are fun and upbeat anyway, so I like them to be at normal speed to match the vibe. So for me, when buying a camera that can shoot 60 frames per second is a must. Most cameras will have this option, but depending on what camera you have will depend on the resolutions available at 60 frames per second. I would recommend shooting no lower than 1080p resolution, as that's the standard in the industry. Older cameras like the Canon 5D Mark III shoot 60 frames per second at 720p, and in my opinion, this is far too low of a resolution for professional wedding videos. So I'd recommend only shooting at 60 frames per second if your camera is capable of doing it at least 1080p. Parker and I both use the 1DX Mark II that can shoot 4K at 60 frames per second. This will take your quality to the next level, but comes with a price, as there aren't many lower end cameras that can shoot 4K at 60. So that having been said, you don't need 4K to shoot weddings. My first year and a half, I filmed weddings on my 5D Mark IV, which can do 1080p at 60, which to me is high quality enough. So unless your clients are asking for it, you don't need 4K. 1080 will be fine, especially since most people view videos from their phones, and it's hard to tell if it was shot in 4K or 1080 anyway. But back to camera settings, second, third, and fourth is shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Let's go over to Parker for a brief explanation of what role your aperture, shutter speed, and ISO all play.
There are 3 numbers that you see on the bottom of your LCD screen. Depending on your camera will depend on which buttons you use to adjust these 3 numbers. So let's take a look at our first number here, which is your shutter speed. Now you'll notice that the higher my shutter speed is, the darker my image gets. This is what the shutter speed looks like at 1 full second and at 1/1000th of a second. Notice how much faster the shutter moves at 1/1000th of a second compared to 1 full second. Because it moves faster, it lets in less light, and this is what darkens your image. But besides just making your image darker or brighter, your shutter speed is affecting your motion blur. So take a look at this video clip shot at 1/30th of a second, and then the same clip shot at 1/1000th of a second. Pay attention to the movement of the lacrosse stick. At 1/30th of a second, there's a lot more motion blur in the image. Now look at the motion blur at 1/1000th of a second. There isn't hardly any motion blur at all. And when I look at individual frames, you see that each still frame is very crisp and sharp. This is what I mean by the shutter speed affecting your motion blur. The higher your shutter speed, the less motion blur you will get. The human eye sees motion blur in real life. So for example, put your hand in front of your face and wave it back and forth, and you'll see that your eye can see motion blur as your fingers cross in front of you. So to replicate the motion blur that is seen by the human eye, the rule of thumb is to always shoot a shutter speed twice your frame rate. So if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, then the rule is to have a shutter speed at 1/48th. But since most DSLRs don't have that option, the closest you can get is 1/50th of a second. And likewise, if you're shooting at 60 frames per second, you double it to 1/120th of a second shutter speed. Element 2 is your aperture, and just like your shutter speed, when your aperture number is higher, it makes your image darker, and when the number is lower, it makes the image brighter. So this lens I have on right now opens up to an f-stop of 1.4 to let in the most amount of light, and closes down to an f-stop of 22 to let in the least amount of light. Basically, the bigger the opening and lower the number, the more light it lets in. But more than just letting in more or less light into your image, your aperture is affecting your depth of field. Depth of field refers to the amount of background blur your image has. So at a low aperture like 2.8, it creates what's called a shallow depth of field, or a small range of focus. and the rest will be blurred out. Here's the same shot at a high aperture. You'll see that there's a much greater depth of field, or more of your image is in focus. I personally try to keep my aperture on the lower end when I'm shooting people or any subject that I want the viewer to be focused on and not be distracted by anything in the background. And for situations like wide landscape shots, I'll bring my aperture higher so I can get as much in focus as possible. You have to remember though, that as you raise your shutter speed or aperture higher, it lets in less light, so you'll have to lower the other number to bring in more light to keep your exposure right. And if you are in low light situations or you want to have both your shutter speed and your aperture high, then you'll have to raise your ISO, which is your third element of exposure. But unlike shutter speed and aperture, when you raise your ISO, it makes the image brighter instead of darker. Now, the ISO affects quality of image. Generally, you want the ISO as low as possible for maximum image quality. For example, here's a video shot at 100 ISO, and the same image shot at 6400 ISO. As you can see, the higher the ISO, the noisier and softer the image becomes. Noise refers to all these moving dots of light in your image. Compare the two side by side and you'll see that the lower ISO has a cleaner, sharper image quality, and the higher ISO has a noisier and softer image. So you always want to keep your ISO as low as possible. In summary, these three elements, your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO, work together to determine the exposure of your image.
Now that you understand what each of those are, let's talk about how it applies to your wedding films. First, aperture. I try and use lenses with the lowest possible aperture because I love that shallow depth of field look, or when the subject is so crisp and the background is so blurry. The times I would raise my aperture are for when I'm shooting landscape shots where I want everything to be in focus, or small details, like this shot of the rings. This shot was on an 85mm 1.4 lens, but I was so close that the background was completely blurry. So I raised my aperture to an f-stop of 5.6 in order to show off the gorgeous backdrop. When I shoot landscapes, I like to raise my aperture to an f-stop of about 8 or 12, which lets everything be in focus at the crispest resolution possible. Regardless of what camera you have, I would suggest investing in a lens with a low aperture to make your subjects appear sharper than the background, to help create depth and make your videos look more cinematic. There are great cheap options out there, like the Canon Pancake lenses, which have f-stops of 1.8 for only 140 bucks. But the more you spend on a lens, usually the nicer the quality. Next, shutter speed. The rule here is to keep your shutter speed at double your frame rate. The higher your shutter speed, the less motion blur you'll see. But if I'm being completely honest, I don't care. Most people can't tell that much of a difference unless there's a lot of motion, especially if you're slowing the footage down. It's going to be hard for people to tell what shutter speed you shot at, so Parker and I will sometimes jack up our shutter speeds to 1/4000th because we love how crisp every individual frame is, which can be a good thing because if the couple asks for one specific frame from the video that they can have, maybe a moment the photographer missed, you can provide it and it will be sharp because of your high shutter speed. But it can also make your footage look jittery if you have too much motion in the image, so be careful with this if you decide to do it. I'm telling you this because I want you to know the rule, but know that it's okay to break it if you understand the situations where it won't be a big deal, like when there isn't a lot of motion in your image. But generally, keep your shutter speed around twice your frame rate for the best results in the motion blur. In broad daylight with a low aperture and low shutter speed, your image will be way overexposed. So in order to bring the exposure down, I use a 3-stop ND filter, which allows me to keep my aperture wide open, my ISO low, and my shutter speed at around twice my frame rate, all while keeping a clean exposure. The problem that comes up when using ND filters, and the reason why sometimes I don't use them, is that if you are changing from really dark to really bright scenes, the ND filter won't be able to cover that broad of a spectrum and will force you to have to boost your ISO if it gets too dark, making your image noisy. So those are the situations I take off my ND filter, like for the reception for example, as that is usually a lower light scenario. And fourthly, ISO. Like Parker mentioned, the lower your ISO, the crisper your image, and obviously that's what you want. On my Canon 1DX Mark II, the highest ISO that I try to use is 6400. 6400 brightens my image just enough in super low light without losing tons of detail and introducing a lot of noise and grain. But if you're using a camera like the Sony a7 III, you can bump up your ISO to almost 12,800 and you'll see almost zero noise, while the 1DX at that same ISO is very noisy. Perks of Sony, great in low light. If you have lights that you bring to your weddings, which we talk about in another video, video, then you shouldn't have any problems with too high of an ISO and grainy footage. And lastly, white balance. Every camera has an auto white balance setting, but I don't recommend it. You don't want your camera changing white balance in the middle of a shot because it thought something was a color it wasn't. Learn to use the manual setting. It's easier than you think. Here's a brief explanation by Parker explaining what white balance is and how it affects your image.
Now, white balance is the color balance inside of your camera. It literally means that your camera is trying to offset or balance the color of light that is being cast on your image to make your whites appear white. For example, this shirt that I'm wearing right now is white, but it doesn't look white in this image because I don't have the white balance set correctly in my camera. All light sources have a color temperature that is measured in the units of Kelvin on a scale from 2500 to 10,000. 2500 being very warm red light, like the kind of light you would see from a sunset or that would be given off by indoor light bulbs, and 10,000 being very cool blue light, like the kind of light you would see if you were to point your camera at a perfectly blue sky at midday. And 5600 Kelvin is the temperature of sun at noonday. Now, as clouds start to roll in, that'll change your color temperature to a more blue hue. And at night, by the moonlight, your color temperature is going to be more around 4,000. Now, your sunrises and your sunsets are going to be anywhere from 25 to 3,500, and most indoor light bulbs are going to be around 3,000. So the light that is shining on me right now is coming from my window, which is daylight, so it's 5600 Kelvin. But my camera is set to 2500 Kelvin. So now I'm going to set the camera to 5600 Kelvin to where it should be so that my whites become white. Now my color balance is correctly set at 5600 Kelvin to match the daylight that's coming in through the window. So that's what it means when it's talking about white balance or color temperature. Those all kind of mean the same thing, and it's all about trying to make your whites look white by adjusting the color balance on your camera.
On the 1DX, all I need to do to quickly adjust the white balance is hit the Q button or the WB button at the top and scroll to the white balance. I could then adjust it to a place I like. On Sony cameras, you can hit the function button and quickly maneuver right to the white balance setting. Sometimes you're in a scene where the lights are giving off a bad tint that you don't want. All you need to do is, while you're on the white balance setting on your camera, hit the info button to bring up your color balance grid, or on your Sony camera, just hit the right arrow and then bring your cursor to the opposite of the color you want to get rid of. For example, when I'm filming sparkler exits, the sparklers give off a very warm light, so my Kelvin goes down, but there's still almost a reddish tint, so I pump more green and blue into it to fix it. Knowing how to use these simple settings give you the confidence that you're capturing the best image straight out of camera. Some things just can't be fixed in post. The first week I had my Mark IV, I didn't know these, and I was filming a friend's proposal where my color balance was way off, and it was unfixable, so don't make that mistake. And lastly, picture profiles. For Canon, hit the Q button, maneuver over to the picture profile icon, select one of the custom profiles, and adjust it accordingly. You can play around with your camera to see what your style is, but for me, here's what I've done. Canon's sharpness is a little too intense for me, so I lower that to +1. Contrast is at -2, saturation at -2, and color tone at 0. Parker has a slightly different look for his wedding videos, which is less moody and more vibrant with more in-camera colors, resulting in less color grading in post. And here's a look at his picture profile. Sharpness set to 0, contrast at -1, saturation at 0, and color tone at 0. Not super different, but there you go. Play around with these settings for yourself to find out what settings you like best. As for Sony, Parker will walk us through our custom picture profile that we created to match Canon colors.
All right, folks, here is the Sony picture profile that I've set to make my colors look like Canon. Come into your settings, into the color white balance section, come down to picture profile, select any of these preset slots, click right, and here's the settings. Black levels +10, gamma still, black gamma, wide range, level -4. Knee, I don't believe we touched this, but it's set to manual mode. And then in manual set, point is at 77.5 and slope is +1. Color mode is ITU 709 matrix. Saturation is -9. Color phase -7. Color depth, I don't believe we changed this, but here's a look at the numbers there. And detail set to -4. And on adjust, I don't believe we touched anything here either, but here's what it looks like. Now you can obviously customize this any way you want. If you want less or more contrast, you can change the black levels. If you want more or less sharpening, you can adjust that in the detail. More or less saturation, you can adjust that. So up to you. That's what I've done to get the results that I've shown you. And lastly, depending on the lighting situation, you may have to pump a little bit of magenta into your image. So with my studio lighting with my Aperture 120D, I came into my white balance and brought my tint down 4 notches, which equals 1 point in magenta. This allowed me to match the skin tones that I would get on my Canon camera. However, outdoors in natural light, I found that this made the image too magenta, so I brought it back to 0. So just be aware that depending on your lighting situation, you may have to add more or less magenta. But that's something I do anyway with my Canon camera as well, depending on the light hues. But there you have it. That is a Sony profile I used to match the skin tones from Canon.
So there you have it. That is it for camera settings. If you can learn how to use these basic settings, you will be ready for just about any situation that's thrown at you. If you guys have any further questions, please let us know. A common misconception in this business is that videographers can't work well with photographers. And to be honest, I've seen a lot of horror stories of videographers actually making that statement true. But I've also seen tons of examples of photographers blatantly getting in the way of us videographers. Let's end that war. It's pointless, it's reckless, and can easily be avoided. This isn't about your video, and this isn't about their pictures. It's about the bride and the groom. I've worked with countless photographers, and I've honestly never had a problem with working alongside them. Have I worked with difficult photographers? Absolutely. But did I have a problem working with them? No. Why? Because I communicated. Communication is a necessary skill every videographer must have in this business. It helps with negotiating, getting inquiries, getting referrals, talking to the bride, to her parents, and in this case, most importantly, to the photographer. This video is going to be short because it's a very simple principle that just requires you to be humble and personable and to practice. Here's my process with communicating with photographers. Rarely do I ever talk to them before the wedding. You can, I just personally don't. I show up early on the wedding day and get to know the photographer right away. I introduce myself and my second shooter. I express how excited I am for the wedding and how I've heard great things about them. I ask what their Instagram handle is and give them a follow so I can see and compliment their work right in front of them. I also tell them that I'm super easy to work with and super chill. I tell them that I will work right alongside them, and if there's a shot I need, I will let them know. But besides that, I'll capture what they capture and let them know if I ever need to direct. Photographers love this approach, and 90% of the time, they want to give it right back at you. They'll usually respond with, "Oh, same, if there's ever a shot you want, just let me know, and I'll let you know as well." Sometimes they may be shy or timid or unapproachable. Do your best. Take charge if they clearly aren't. I then walk around the venue with them and kind of go over the schedule for the day, the ceremony, the portraits, and the reception. I discuss where they like to be during all these events and where I would like to be. I discuss the shots I want to get and talk with them about how we can make it all work without being in each other's way. I talk about important moments like the first kiss or the bride walking down the aisle. I make it absolutely clear where I want to be, and they make it clear to me where they will be, thus removing any horrible surprises. And boom, you're done. We're on the same page, we're a team, not competitors. We both do our jobs well, work around each other, and life's a breeze. Throughout the day, I talk with them, get to know them, compliment their work. Oftentimes, they've been doing this a lot longer than I have, so I love to learn from them and ask questions. I try to cultivate a great friendship because a lot of my clients come from photographer referrals. Don't be that guy who makes it almost impossible for the photographer to be nice to. Don't be that guy who posts up a tripod right in the middle of the aisle, 5 feet from the couple during a ceremony. Those videographers are embarrassing. Please don't be that guy. Don't be that guy who rushes in front of the photographer to get the shot first. Don't be that guy who shows up to the wedding and never talks to the photographer. Don't be that guy who just stands there and waits till the photographer is done posing so that you can pose the couple the way you want to. Just share the dang pose. You both can shoot it. All it comes down to is communication. Communicate with the photographer, and I promise you, you will have zero problems with them during the wedding. I've been able to make incredible friends. These photographers send me clients all the time, and I send them clients. We're actively helping each other grow our businesses, and that all started with great communication. So again, at the end of the day, just communicate. Simple as that. And if you guys have any further questions, please let me know. Hey guys, in this video we're going to talk about how to shoot a ceremony. Now there's a lot to go over in this video, so please bear with me. I recently posted on our Facebook group what questions you guys had about shooting a ceremony, and I'll be diving into every single question with a detailed explanation and going over multiple scenarios that you might all find yourselves in. Shooting a ceremony is different for everyone, everywhere, and a lot of you guys were asking about how to shoot a ceremony if you had one camera or 4 cameras, 1 shooter or 3 shooters, indoor or outdoor. So while I'll be going over tons of different scenarios and situations, I want you to pay attention to the principles that we talk about so that you can apply them to any situation you encounter. There's no way I can cover every possible scenario, so take away what you can and apply what you can and watch yourself grow and get better, which is the ultimate goal for all of us. So, where to begin? Let's start with the pre-ceremony, pre-wedding day communication. The ceremony is obviously the moment of the wedding, alright? It's the pinnacle of everything. Years of dating, being engaged, stressful planning, time and money spent are all coming to a head at this one 15 to 20 minute moment. So should you take it seriously? Yes. And should you be prepared? Absolutely. And should you blame the photographer if you don't get what you wanted? Well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but we're going to get to that. So let's start with the pre-wedding day communication. You want to arrive at the ceremony fully prepared. You want to know what the schedule will be like. You want to know who will be saying what, who will be where, and what the bride envisions happening during that important moment. Before my weddings, I like to either jump on a call with my brides and wedding planners, or even just a simple email and ask a few questions such as, will the bride and groom be reading personal vows, as in the ones they write themselves and read to each other, not to be confused with traditional vows that they repeat back to the officiant. Knowing this helps me determine my camera setup and also if I want to suggest the bride to wear a lav mic or not. For example, if the bride and the groom aren't saying their own vows, then that means the officiant will be saying 90 to 95% of the ceremony. So he will be just as important, if not more important, to focus on in regards to camera angles and lav placement. Next question, will there be a DJ covering the ceremony? Sometimes the DJ is there from the ceremony to the reception, and sometimes the DJ just comes for the reception. This is crucial for me to know because I need to know how prepared to come with my audio equipment. If there's no DJ, I need to plan time to make sure my audio equipment gets set up and tested before the guests start to arrive. I like to give myself at least 30 minutes, hopefully less, to figure it out. I say 30 minutes because of one experience where I just couldn't get the audio to transmit into my recorder and took 1,000 different attempts, so be prepared. Next question I like to ask, will there be any other additional speeches or prayers given that they want recorded and put into the video? Ideally, I'll be able to use the DJ's or venue's audio equipment to capture it, but I also need to be ready with a good camera and a good lens to switch over to. Next question, with a lot of religious ceremonies, specifically ones that take place in a church building or chapel, you want to find out if you are even allowed to film there. Some chapels don't want you up front at all. They don't want you to be seen or heard. So make sure to communicate with a wedding planner or the pastor to see where you can shoot without ruining the ceremony. My guess is a lot of these pastors have had horrible experiences with photographers and videographers, hence this rule. So respect the rule, be courteous, and just do your best. And lastly, are there any special or sentimental moments or details or people that they want me to focus on during the ceremony? For example, some brides have dogs as ring bearers and want tons of footage captured of the dog. Or there's a floral arrangement or a grandmother they want to have a lot of screen time, things like that. Your job is to produce a beautiful video for the bride and the groom, and beauty comes much more naturally when it holds sentimental value. So find out what those things are before you show up. Moving on to the wedding day, let's talk about pre-ceremony. First things first, let's get the big one out of the way. Working with photographers. I've loved most of the photographers I've worked with, and I hope you do too, but yes, you'll always run into problems. Even in my experience, with great communication, stuff happens. So step number 1, find the photographer and put together a game plan. Make sure you know where you'll be and then plan for everything. And don't get angry. The photographer has the ability to capture every possible angle of the ceremony much easier than you do. So don't get mad when they walk into one of your 4 shots. It's going to happen. For example, when I put a camera in the back of the venue in the middle of the aisle, there's obviously a 99% chance that the photographer is going to want to get a shot in the aisle and block my view. Is it their fault? No. You can't claim claim dominion over a certain angle just by putting a camera there. Don't be stupid. So I talk with the photographers. I tell them where I'm going to be and tell them where my cameras will be. I tell them not to stress too much about getting in the way of my cameras, but to just be mindful that they're there and hope that they're courteous. But then I also put my cameras in positions and heights that hopefully remove any possibility of the photographer blocking my shots, which we'll get to later. I like telling the photographers that I'll just stick close to them so that we can both get a variety without the other being in the shot. This may work for you, it may not. It works for me. We'll come back to this a lot as we move through the process of the ceremony, but as for pre-ceremony, establish a good relationship and game plan with the photographer. It'll work wonders. Next person you want to talk to before the ceremony is obviously the wedding planner. You should already have all the details you need from your pre-wedding day emails, but double check with her on the schedule and placement of everything. Make sure you know which side the bride will be on and which side the groom will be on. It's different every time. And lastly, you should have already connected with the bride and the groom by now on the day of, but double check with them about wearing a lav mic. I send my brides a questionnaire before the wedding day where they can check yes or no to wearing a lav mic. Most don't want to, but if the bride wants to, I make sure there's a lav ready to go on her dress, which we talk about in a different video, so watch that if you haven't. I make sure to find the groom and make sure the lav is on him right before the ceremony and that it's ready to go. Depending on the schedule, I'll sometimes will start recording right then or just find him right before the ceremony and hit record. And then I'll find the officiant and make sure that they are laved and ready to go as well. All right, moving on to camera setup. You're probably going to be shooting with your cameras right up until the ceremony, so you want to be quick when it comes to setting up. I'll try and break it down on what to do with one camera, two cameras, or three cameras, and one or two shooters. Your audio should already be set up at this point and ready to go, so it's time to set up your cameras. Okay, before we dive into this, I want to mention that if you do not own a 70-200mm, I highly recommend renting or buying one for every ceremony. It's a must. It's not a luxury. It's not a nice thing to have if you can afford it. It's a must, especially as a wedding videographer. You can rent them in most places for like 25 bucks a day. So do it. Do it. Just do it. Do it. Do it. We'll talk about why. Starting with a one camera setup. Before I jump into it, I would also like to recommend, if you can, to rent a second camera body for the ceremony. You'll love yourself for it and it'll make your life 1,000 times easier. Again, 25 to 30 bucks a day to rent, and even if the client isn't paying you a lot, it's a small cost that you should be able to cover. But let's talk about if you only have one camera first. Especially if you only have one camera, rent a 70-200 or buy one. You want to be invisible and still capture those up close, intimate moments. I used to crouch down on the front row of the ceremonies during the vows and everything else. I would go there and go back, go there and go back, and it was intrusive and distracting. Don't follow from my mistakes. With only one camera, you have a few options here. You can set it up in the back of the ceremony with your 70-200 on a tripod or monopod, slightly to the left or right of the aisle. Why not in the center? Because the photographer will ruin your footage, and again, you don't own the aisle. Put it slightly to the left or the right, zoomed in all the way, so the bride, officiant, and groom are all in the frame. But what about when the bride's walking down the aisle? Not a problem. Go to the front, everyone will be standing anyway, so you won't really be the center of attention. Zoom out to 70mm on your lens and film the bride walking down the aisle and the bridal party. Then you can quickly pan over to the groom to capture his reaction, and once she's up front, you can walk around the ceremony and post up in the back. If the client is paying for a separate ceremony edit, which should mean they are paid you extra, then rent 2 to 3 more cameras. Seriously, yes, one camera's doable, I've done it, but you lose so much of the story. You miss out on so many intimate moments, and if they're wanting a full-length ceremony edit, one camera just will not do. Would you watch a 20-minute video of your wedding ceremony with no cuts or angle changes? I wouldn't. Also, with one camera, if the photographer or a guest gets in the way of your camera, even for 2 seconds, that's it. That's it. You have no other options. That lady's head or that photographer's arm will be in the ceremony video forever. Invest in your business if you want others to invest in you. Okay, so that's my rant about using one camera. So Jake, are you telling me to rent another camera and more lenses? Well, yeah, why not? That's maybe 75 bucks a day for one day, and to me, it's worth it. Even if you get paid nothing, Invest, spend a little, you'll make a lot more. All right, let's quickly talk about a 2-camera setup. Now you have a little bit more creative freedom. Even if the client didn't pay for a full-length ceremony edit, I always shoot with that in mind in case they end up wanting to purchase it after their highlight video is delivered, which happens about 50% of the time. So with that in mind, if you have 2 cameras and let's say just one 7200mm, I would post up my 7200 in the back, again, zoomed in so that the bride, groom, and officiant fill the frame. And with my second camera, I would have it on me at all times with maybe a 50 or 85mm. I take that versatile camera to the front to film the bride walking down the aisle and still pan over to capture the groom's reaction in case someone stood up and blocked my other camera in the back. Once the bride gets to the front, I'd spend the rest of the ceremony in the back filming different angles of the ceremony taking place. Guest reactions, details, variety of shots of the bride and the groom standing up there, etc. This gives you a lot more freedom in the editing room to cut between shots in case anything were to obstruct the view of one of the cameras, and it makes their ceremony edit that much more engaging. Moving on to 3 cameras, which is what I currently am doing and using, and I'm incredibly glad I do and will never go back to anything less. Yes, you might be saying you can't afford it or don't have the means, but for those who do, or for those who are willing to rent some gear to try this and improve the quality of your ceremonies, this is for you. One camera is off to the side, zoomed in at 200mm to focus on the bride. The other camera is opposite to focus on the groom. The third camera is on me the entire time with again a 50 or 85mm. I still will crouch in the front to get the bride walking down the aisle and then stay in the back of the ceremony or in the aisle for the rest of the ceremony. This opens up so much more emotion for the final edit. You have a close-up of the bride as to capture those little quirks, laughs, and tears. And you have the same of the groom. Your third camera that you're carrying around can capture shots of the ceremony as a whole, the guests watching, details, etc. And you can only imagine what you could do with 4 to 5 cameras. You could have a camera solely for the officiant or the parents, or a wide camera for the entire scene. Possibilities are endless. So there you have what I would do with different amounts of cameras and one shooter myself. Once the cameras are set up, I wait for the groom to get to the front of the ceremony. He's usually first, and I make sure my groom cam is framed up correctly for him, and I set the focus and then turn off autofocus. He'll be staying there the entire time, and you should be fine at like a 2.8 aperture. If he side shuffles a little bit, he should still be in focus. I make sure my bride cam is rolling as well. With one shooter, you risk the chance that when the bride arrives and the guests stand, will block your view of the groom, so make sure the camera is far enough to the side so that it won't happen. But I always pan over to the groom after filming the bride in the aisle just in case. Once the bride is up there, I go to my bride cam, set the focus, adjust it if I need to, and walk away. This is where a second shooter comes into play. I always tell you guys that if you really want to up the production quality of your wedding films, hire a second shooter. Yes, you'll make less money, but the quality of your videos will go up incredibly, and you'll be able to raise your prices and book better weddings. Again, invest in your business if you want people to invest in you. For example, when I have a second shooter, I'm confident that when the guests stand up during the bridal entrance, my shooter will move the camera and adjust whatever he needs to on the groom cam so that no one is blocking the camera's view. Having a second shooter walking back and forth between cameras gives me the assurance and peace of mind that both of my cameras are in focus, working properly, and most importantly, recording. My shooter's purpose is to solely man those cameras and make sure that they're doing their job. And for those 20, 30 minutes, 10, 15, whatever, paying them is worth every penny. Moving on, the last thing I want to touch on is setting up lights for indoor ceremonies if needed. If possible, I try to avoid it. The bride and the planner have gone through a lot of work to have their ceremony match a certain vibe and mood. You don't want to come in with your tripods and your lights and ruin that mood. Make sure to communicate with them if you feel like it's necessary, and if they are okay with it, go for it. If you need to, I would make sure to have 2 lights, one far behind the groom as to light up his back and also illuminate the bride, and one behind the bride to do the same to the groom. Match the temperature with the room's lighting, or get as close to daylight lighting as you can, and then adjust your camera settings as necessary to give you a pretty white balance. But again, if you can, avoid this. Alright, so now you know where I'd place my cameras and how I'd use those cameras with 1 or 2 shooters. Let's quickly dive into the ceremony itself. Before the ceremony starts, priority number 1 is to make sure that all the lav mics and audio recorders have been tested and are rolling. I'll then double check with my second shooter or check on my cameras to make sure the batteries are charged, the SD card has room, and that it's working properly. I'll then double check with the photographer to confirm our game plan. Once the ceremony begins, it's time to remain calm. Remain calm. Make sure your cameras are rolling, and then quietly place yourself at the front of the ceremony to film the bridal party entrance. Be courteous and be quiet. Don't block someone's seat, and do everything you can to not be a distraction. You don't even have to be at the front if you don't want to. You can be behind everyone, zoomed in tight, or get the bride walking from behind and show off her dress. But for me, being at the front is the best angle. Once the bride has reached her groom, I back up and film from afar the handoff from the father of the bride to the groom. Once that happens, the audience is seated and it's time to triple check on everything. First, I go to my closest camera if my second shooter isn't there and make sure the framing is good, that it's rolling and exposed properly. I'll do the same with the other cam, then head over to the DJ or audio table and check to see that my audio recorder for the house audio is working and rolling. Once everything has been triple checked, I start filming with my C-cam. I go for a variety. I'll stay in a couple different places for at least 10 seconds and get a variety of panoramas, push-ins, pull-outs, and artistic shots, all while trying to stay relatively close to the photographer so we don't obstruct each other's shots. When the ring exchange happens, have your second shooter zoom in lower or adjust the camera to film the hands receiving the rings, or communicate with the photographer to crouch down in the aisle to film it. In my opinion, the best angle is from the aisle. So maybe you move one of your 70-200 cams to the back once the vows are over in order to capture the ring exchange and the first kiss from the best angle. After the rings, the first kiss happens and you want to capture it from the middle. It's the best angle. Communicate with the photographer so you can both be in the aisle and walk backwards as they walk down as husband and wife. Or you can stay far away and pan your 70-200 camera, but odds are that the guests will stand up and block the view. So again, the aisle is the best. And there you have it. There is a ceremony, but don't pack up too soon because there are usually some great moments of celebration right after the ceremony when the bridal party runs up to the bride and the groom and celebrates. So capture it, the more footage the better. So Jake, what if the photographer is an absolute nightmare and ignores our game plan and doesn't let me get the shots I need? Well, all the more reason for 3 cameras. Even if there are 2 photographers and they both happen to block a camera at the same time, that still leaves you one good angle for you to use in post if you need to. The photographers are just doing their job. Most of them won't prioritize your shots over theirs, and I doubt you would either. So deal with it and don't blame them. After you've communicated, established a good relationship, and established a game plan, the ball's in their court. And if they don't want to follow along, just do your job the best you can with confidence. And lastly, because you asked specifically for it, here are some of the mistakes I've made with filming ceremonies in hope that you don't make those same mistakes. Missing the first kiss. Putting a lav mic on the officiant that had such a low battery it died before the ceremony started. He was the only one speaking the entire ceremony and I missed it. Filming the ring exchange up close, which blocked everyone's view. Packing up right when the ceremony ended and missing an incredible celebration toast. Setting up the groom cam in the wrong spot so that when people stood, they blocked the groom. Missing the groom's reaction completely on both cameras. Putting my ceremony cam in the middle of the aisle, which the photographer ended up blocking most of. Not hitting record on the audio recorders and having 0 backups. Not testing out new audio equipment for the wedding and ending up not having it working and having to use a shotgun mic audio. And so many others. You'll make mistakes too, your own mistakes. You probably already have, and that's okay. Move on, get better, improve, invest. Well, I hope this helps you better understand how I handle my ceremonies. Again, there's so many right ways to film, but hopefully you found some value that you can apply to your business. Make sure to check out the job shadows in the course that show me on set of my ceremonies. I'm sorry there's not as many as I'd like. I'm working on them. They're hard. I'll do my best. But guys, as always, if you have any further questions, please let me know.